Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Paul Godoldig, and I have the privilege of serving as the CEO of the Jewish Community Center of San Francisco. Wow, warm crowd tonight. Thank you. On behalf of the JCCSF, it's my honor to welcome you to this evening's program, The Amen Effect, Ancient Wisdom to Mend Our Broken Hearts and World, with Rabbi Sharon Brous and Barry Feinstone. The JCCSF has been woven into the amazing tapestry of the city of San Francisco for almost 150 years. Urban and inclusive, we create spaces where people of all ages, backgrounds, and identities can find a place for lifelong learning, friendship, and a sense of community. For decades, we've offered preschools and summer camps, fitness and swim lessons, and social connections for older adults. Through our arts and culture programming, our holiday celebrations, and educational programs, we celebrate and explore Jewish culture and traditions as a pathway for a meaningful and joyful life. Yet, this is not business as usual. It's not normal times. We find ourselves in an extremely difficult moment. Since the terrorist attacks of October 7th, and with the ensuing war in Israel and Gaza, there has been a sense of shock and concern and grief. And in some cases, this has created a sense of wanting to bond together, of wanting people of people feeling a sense of wanting to reconnect with their Jewish identity. In other ways, this moment has exposed wide differences within the Jewish community that have likely been building for years. We're also witnessing, as you know, an alarming rise of anti-Semitism on social media, in schools, and campuses, and many Jews are feeling something that they may not have felt for some time, an uncomfortable sense of vulnerability and isolation. So that gives us at the JCC a pivotal moment to think about what is our role at this time. How can we make sure that we remain relevant? How can we be of service? One way that we do that is, as we are doing this evening, to bring and to host experts and thought leaders to guide us in understanding and navigating these critical times. And we're going to have some other programs coming up soon as well. In the coming weeks, Yossi Klein Halevi, Senior Fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and the author most recently of a book called Letters to My Palestinian Neighbors. He'll be here at the JCC on May 21st, and he'll be speaking about, his topic is what October 7th meant for the contract between the Israeli people and its state, and what Israelis want the world to know right now. The JCCF also provides opportunities for connection and community. So on Friday, April 19th, we're hosting a vegetarian Shabbat dinner in partnership with One Table and Honeymoon Israel. We'll be celebrating Micah Siva's new cookbook, Nosh. It is almost sold out, so get your tickets now if you'd like to join us. On April 30th, Joan Nathan, a beloved authority on global Jewish cuisine, will be here with her cookbook, My Life in Recipes, to talk about food, family, and memories. And then, of course, as we approach May 9th, as we approach Mother's Day, on May 9th, we're going to host 4 awesome Jewish moms, Eliza Strauss, Yael Goldstein-Love, Dina Aronoff, and Lauren Schiller. They're going to examine the power and depth of Jewish motherhood, reject old misogynistic stereotypes, and elevate mothers to a place of profound respect that they have long deserved. And yes, there will be wine at that event as well. Speaking of wine, we also welcome everyone to celebrate Passover, the first night Seder on April 22nd. We've been doing that for over 35 years here at the JCC, and please join us and let your friends know. A few words of gratitude. Sincere thanks to the Jim Joseph Foundation and to Books, Inc. for providing copies of the book, The Amen Effect. By the way, Rabbi Brous will be in the atrium afterwards. She's pre-signed your books, but is also able to personalize them or just say hello. Appreciation also goes to our friends, the Contemporary Jewish Museum, Congregation Beth Shalom, and City Church for helping spread the word about tonight's program and for being here tonight in the audience. Thank you to Jane the baker for some of the most delicious tasting cookies that you will taste afterwards, after the event. I also want to thank the JCC staff for their hard work and dedication and for pulling together each and every day to make us shine. And I also, by the way, overheard Stephanie Singer, our Director of Arts and Ideas here at the JCC, celebrating 18 years at the JCC. We have several board members, both past and present here. I want to thank you for your leadership, for your wise counsel, for your time, and donors. We are a nonprofit organization. We would not be able to do programs like this and others without your support. So if you're a donor, thank you. If you're not yet a donor, what are you waiting for? Please consider the JCC in your philanthropic plans. And thank you all for being here tonight, for coming together to learn, for wrestling and engaging with sometimes challenging topics, and for recognizing the spiritual necessity of being together in person and in community with each other. And now, our program. Rabbi Sharon Brous is here this evening. She is the senior and founding rabbi of IKAR, a trailblazing Jewish community based in Los Angeles, and is the author of The Amen Effect, Ancient Wisdom to Heal Our Hearts and Mend Our Broken World, which is a national bestseller. A leading voice at the intersection of faith and justice in America, she has been named the #1 most influential rabbi in the U.S. by the Daily Beast and has been recognized by the Forward and the Jerusalem Post as among the most influential Jews alive today. She blessed both President Obama and President Biden at their inaugural prayer services, led the White House Passover Seder in 2021, and also the Hanukkah candle lighting with the Vice President and Second Gentleman in 2023. So lots of trips to D.C. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and her 2016 TED Talk, Reclaiming Religion, has been viewed more than 1.5 million times. On a personal note, I will also say, I know a lot of rabbis, but she's the rabbi who more of my friends will post and just say, read this or watch this with her sermons and her talks. So you're in for a treat tonight. Appearing with Rabbi Brous is Barry Feinstone, the president and CEO of the Jim Joseph Foundation. The Jim Joseph Foundation, it's a San Francisco-based foundation. It's one of the largest and most dedicated there is to investing in Jewish educational grant initiatives and Jewish learning experiences for youth and young adults in the United States. Prior to the Jim Joseph Foundation, Barry was the executive director of the Lisa and John Pritzker Family Fund, and he moved to the Bay Area in 2010 to become the CEO of the JCC of San Francisco, where he served for 5 years and oversaw dramatic growth that built it into the second largest JCC in the country. Barry is a proud Glasgow, Scotland native who loves football, as he says, the real kind you play with your feet. So, friends, please join me in a warm welcome to Rabbi Sharon Brous and Barry Feinstone.
You know, I think some of the content of the promotion of this was about my being in conversation with Rabbi Brous. There will be very little conversation. I will be asking the great rabbi some questions, and we will all listen and learn and marvel at her sheer and utter brilliance. And it is just a real honor to be with you here tonight. So let me just get started and just kick off the conversation. The book, what is the Amen Effect?
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm really very touched and grateful, and I love San Francisco, and so glad to be here. And I want to thank Paul and Stephanie for putting this together, and the whole team at the JCC. And thank you to Barry and the folks at Jim Joseph who made it possible for this evening to happen. I'm really touched. Okay, what is the Amen Effect? That's what we're here to discuss. we are, as we all know, living in a moment of intersecting crises, very serious and profound crises. At the heart of these crises is one in particular that I have been focused on for now about 10 years, which is the loneliness crisis, a crisis of loneliness, social alienation, and isolation. I see it from a pastoral perspective, the impact that loneliness has on the spirit, the way that we are not okay, that our kids are not okay. Even before COVID, we knew that this was the case. There were studies that showed that more than 20% of Americans said that they did not have a single confidant, nobody in the world who they trusted, who they felt that they could turn to when they were grieving, when they were unwell, when they were worried about the future, or when they were celebrating in moments of joy. There's a kind of detachment, a social detachment, which obviously COVID only exacerbated. Then we have all of this literature, which started coming out about 15 years ago, about the physical impact of loneliness, that it really does damage to our bodies, that acute loneliness is essentially the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of its impact on our lungs and our hearts. It brings on early onset illness. It's really doing a number to our systems. And we know that it's not just a spiritual illness and a physical illness, but actually Hannah Arendt, the great 20th century Jewish philosopher, wrote that loneliness, social alienation, and isolation are essentially preconditions for totalitarianism. That tyrannical regimes cannot get their tentacles into a social structure if people know their neighbors, if people have not turned against each other. And yet, look at our society. Again, before COVID, in 2019, a study came out that said that 1 in 3 Americans do not know the names of their next door neighbors. Literally, the person living to the right and living to the left of them. So our society is ripe for tyranny right now, I'm sorry to say. And she writes about conspiracy theories. Like, conspiracy theories cannot take hold in societies where people know each other. So, I mean, this makes so much sense. But, like, imagine that you plan this beautiful outdoor wedding and it starts to pour on your wedding day. And then someone tells you that the Jews are controlling the weather with their space lasers. And you believe them. Unless you happen to know a Jew who also had rain on her wedding day. And then you're like, wait, this doesn't check out. So the thing is, if we don't know each other, we are vulnerable to being turned against each other by forces that thrive when we are wedged against one another. So we have a crisis of spirit, a crisis of body, and a crisis of democracy, a social crisis. And essentially, in the heart of all of that crisis can be this incredible sense of powerlessness, a lack of agency, like, what can I do? And I've heard many people describe the more we learn about the climate catastrophe, the more powerless we feel. Because when you really are aware of how bad something is, the more you feel like there's nothing I can do about it. But in this crisis, the loneliness, social alienation, and isolation epidemic, we are everything but powerless. We actually have incredible power. What we need to do is figure out how to turn toward each other precisely when our strongest instinct is to retreat from one another. And there's some very profound ancient wisdom that reinforces that. There's one particular ritual that I came across when I was in seminary and then essentially rediscovered 10 years later after we had started to build IKAR, our community in Los Angeles. And I saw this ritual and thought, oh my God, it's the very essence of life in some ways. It describes when people in ancient times, Jews, used to go up to Jerusalem on the holiest of days, used to ascend to this city, as you might know, a city on a hill, then ascend the steps of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the holiest place in the holiest city on the holiest of days, walk through this beautiful arched entryway and turn to the right and circle around the perimeter of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And so now imagine that this whole crowd that's here tonight, hundreds of people, are just circling all the way around this room en masse together and then basically leaving the same place they came in. But now imagine not a few hundred people, but hundreds of thousands of people all coming up the same day and circling in the same direction, this very powerful ritual, except the text says, Misha Erodavar, someone to whom something terrible had happened. someone with a broken heart. And that person would go up to Jerusalem and then ascend the steps of the temple and go through the same entryway, but turn to the left when everyone else turned to the right. And then this sacred encounter would happen between the brokenhearted person and the people who are just there because it's a pilgrimage day and they're in Jerusalem. And the encounter would look like this. You're coming from this direction and I'm coming from this direction. And you would look me in the eye and you would say very simply, Ma lach, what happened to you? Tell me about your broken heart. What do you see from your vantage point? And I would turn to you and I would say, my father just died a few months ago, and I'm trying to figure out how to access grief personally when I'm also dealing with this broader collective grief of our time, and I'm just struggling. And you would bless me. You would say, stranger, may you feel the presence of the Holy One that dwells in this place as you navigate your time of grief. Or I would say to you, you know what? I'm sick. I just got back the scan results and I'm really terrified of the treatment ahead. Or I would say, I'm just so lonely and I feel like there's literally nobody in the world who understands me. Or, my partner just left. Or I'm really scared about one of my kids and I don't know how to help her. She's not letting me in, but I'm worried about her. Whatever it was that I'm holding in my heart that day that makes me not like everybody else, the person going this way would offer a blessing. May you, as you navigate this scary time with your child, find friends and companions who have been through similar experiences and can help guide you with good wisdom and sound advice. Whatever your blessing is. And that's it. That's the whole ritual. These people would continue this way, these people would continue this way, and then they go all have dinner afterwards. And I realized when I read this ritual that what was so profound about it was that the rabbis understood when they described this ancient ritual that none of the people who are involved in it actually want to participate in this ritual. That the people who are not okay, Misha Ero Davar, someone to whom something awful had happened, the last thing we want to do is even get out of bed, let alone get dressed and climb up a big mountain and then climb up a bunch of stairs and then walk in the opposite direction from everybody. And yet we all know that feeling when it feels like the whole world's walking this way and you're walking this way. I bet everybody in this room has experienced that at some point. And they actually turned it into a ritual. They said, you don't stay home, you show up, and you don't walk through the entryway and pretend you're like everyone else. Put on a happy face because you're not okay. And one of the most important things that we can learn is that we don't pretend we're okay when we're not. Instead, we put our pain into the context of a community that will hold us tenderly. And we just trust that the person who's coming this way is not going to ignore me, is not going to mock me, is not going to deride me, is not going to sidestep me, but instead will ask in an open-hearted way, tell me about your pain. And I will trust that my answer will be held with love. And the people who are going this way don't want to be in this relationship either. Because they're having literally the time of their lives. And, I've described, I started reading testimonies from people who went on the Hajj to try to understand some of what the emotional impact of that pilgrimage ritual must have felt like for our ancestors, because this is the closest thing that we have. And they talk about how the minute they arrive in Mecca, they just burst into tears, and some people's whole bodies just collapse to the ground. And they're having like an out-of-body experience in some ways. And they're just walking with masses and masses of people. Some people save up their entire lives for the opportunity to go to Mecca. This is like the great dream, and I know it was that way for our ancestors in Jerusalem. So you save, and you wait, and you plan, and you prepare, and then you're there with all your camp friends, and you're all going in the circle in the same way, but you see some stranger coming in the other direction, and you're like, sorry guys, I'll catch up with you later. I have to go check on this stranger. Like, it's totally counterinstinctual, and yet that's exactly what they do. And if you read the text, that is the holy work that they're there to do. Not to offer sacrifices, not to get blessed from the high priest, to see the stranger whose heart is broken, and just to see them in their humanity, to ask them with real open-hearted curiosity, and then to bless them. And I realized that we had been given this gift of this ritual that hasn't been practiced in 2,000 years. and is buried in a very obscure Mishnah in Midot, which is not like top 10 Mishnahs of all time. And, and actually what it's doing is it's giving us the answer, or an answer, to this moment of loneliness and isolation and social alienation and political extremism and crisis of democracy. And it's saying your instinct right now is to turn away from each other and run as fast as you can, or to turn toward each other only to fight. But you are called to turn toward each other with tenderness, with compassion, with curiosity, and with care. And that is the only way that we can heal as individuals, as communities, and as a society. That's the Amen effect.
That will be one of a series of mic drops. So, I couldn't help but think, about the gazing and, here in San Francisco and tragically around a lot of major cities in America, you can't go anywhere in the morning or during the day without seeing a homeless person. And of course, I'll say myself, many times I turn my gaze away. And I, had the distinct honor of being with Rabbi Brous last night at another event, and just made me think about how just that teaching can inform and make me and all of us, act in a very different way. Mm-hmm. Well, is there something particular, because you talked about the fact that you stumbled upon this, piece of Mishnah many years ago when you were in seminary, kind of came back to the fore. Was there something that inspired the writing in the book, or had it kind of been stuck back there dormant for an awful long time?
So, the origin story of my love story with this Mishnah begins when I'm a young seminary student and living in New York City, and I encountered the text for the first time. And I just loved studying sacred text. I sat in the Beit Midrash and studied Gemara basically 14 hours a day. I really fell in love. As somebody who grew up thinking since I was 5 that I was going to be a civil rights attorney, once I studied Talmud for the first time in college, I'm like, this is my love. Like, this is where it's going to be. I have a whole love montage with the Talmud. So, anyway, Midot is like it's just true. I really do love the learning. But I saw this text and I did not understand it. It's very terse. If you look at the Mishnah, you'll say after, because it's in the back of the book. I put the whole thing in. You'll say, okay, I can see where she got that from this, but it's not terribly obvious at first glance. And when I read it, thankfully I said, there's something here that I do not understand. It's really in the context of describing the architectural framework of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, not the most riveting of texts, honestly. But I felt like something was going on, and I photocopied the page, I folded it up, I put it back in my Mishnah and back on my shelf, and I didn't find it again for 10 more years. And when I found it, it was this epiphanous moment, because we were 10 years into building IKAR, our community at that point. And we really built IKAR to stand at the intersection of the revitalization, reanimation of Jewish learning, Jewish ritual, Jewish life on one hand, and social justice, the quest for building a more just and loving society at the same time. And I wanted to excavate our sacred tradition and help us learn how we are called in moments of moral crisis to really build a just and loving society. When I found this text 10 years later, having had, some children, having officiated a lot of weddings, having helped people through divorce, having buried a lot of people, some tragically, I suddenly understood something about the role of a rabbi and about the Jewish community, which is, as much as we believed that our role in the world was to help build the beloved community out in the world, Dr. King's vision of a world redeemed, a world without racism and white supremacy, a world without misogyny and transphobia and human cruelty and war and violence and all of those things, and poverty and exploitation, I realized that we could never build that beloved community out in the world if we did not start by building the beloved community here among ourselves with each other. And it wasn't that we should stop doing all of our justice work and focus internally. It was that these things had to feed each other, that we had to nourish the big dream by engaging in the local dream. You can't dream of a world redeemed while, cutting people online for kiddush and taking the last piece of lox. Like, it doesn't work. And so, and I literally...
So it's a little bit like kind of putting the oxygen mask on first and taking care of yourself?
A little bit like that. I mean, the way that I described it, I'll describe it like this to you. My kids, when they were little, came running into our bedroom the morning after a very contentious and very painful election some years ago. I won't specify when. They came running into our bedroom first thing in the morning because we put them to bed the night before it was conclusive, who had won. And they asked us who won the presidential election, and we told them. And they burst into tears and threw their little bodies on the ground, and they were crying, and they were worried about our future in this country. They were worried about our Black friends, our Muslim friends, our queer friends. They were worried about America itself. And I, it's hard to be a rabbi's kid, I think, for them. But this was one moment where I'm like, okay, I'm bringing my best rabbinic self to this moment. And I said to them, you listen to me. The world out there just got a lot uglier and a lot harder and a lot crueler. And we are going to be we are exactly who we were yesterday, but better versions of ourselves. We care more deeply about the world. We are more compassionate. We are more patient. We're more passionate about the things that matter most. We build within this house an oasis of love and justice. And when the world is ready, that oasis of love and justice will ripple out and have a transformative effect on the whole world. And my kids are like, okay, Ema, okay. So for 10 minutes, they were awesome to each other. No fighting, yeah. But then I went to Shul on Shabbat, and I told the same thing to our community. And I was like, no more fighting in this community over the locks, over the parking spots, over the air conditioning. No more yelling at staff people because you didn't get the seat you wanted to get. We have to manifest the values that we dream are possible out there. Okay, now I'm really detouring from the book. Okay. But I will tell you this, that the same principle held here. I mean, actually, the idea emerged years before that fateful election. But I really realized that we have to invest in building the beloved community inside if we ever dream of realizing the beloved community out there. How do we do that? By actually turning toward each other, precisely at the moments that we want to turn away from each other, in moments of grief and agony and anguish, in moments where we just don't see the world the same way. We have to learn how to look to each other with tender hearts. And so I gave a sermon called The Amen Effect 11 years ago on Yom Kippur, on Kol Nidre. And I basically made this argument. I told them about the ritual in the Temple Mount that I had rediscovered. And I said, we have to learn to turn to one another in sorrow, in celebration, and in solidarity. That is the way that we can actually reclaim our agency in a world that wants us to believe that we are powerless. That's the way that we can mend our own broken hearts and help mend each other's. And that is also ultimately the way that we save our society, that we save our democracy. Because it's not going to happen, only because once every couple years you go and vote in November. You should do that. But it's going to happen because we create a culture shift where we don't run away from the people we disagree with, but we engage them with curiosity, where, we don't run away from each other from when others are hurting. But instead we turn toward them with love and bring them lasagna. There are ways that we can create new neural pathways that end up changing our mindset and the lens through which we see the world. And each of us has the power to do that.
Thank you. Beautiful. So I know you wrote this book prior to the passing of your father just a few months ago. And as a rabbi, you're spending most of your time circling to the right, but you're also yourself now circling to the left. How do you hold that? How do you manage that?
I almost never lean to the right, but I do circle to the right by profession. It's hard. I mean, I think that there are people in this room, I know that there are people in this room because I know some of you, who either by profession or by nature or both tend to turn to the right and see the brokenhearted who are before us. And, I share in the book this one little story about my mom when my dad had taken a bad fall, and we went to the hospital with him, and we were so worried about him. And my mom was standing with him after he'd been seen, and I was going to run and go get the car, and she's basically holding my dad up. And there was this guy who just went walking through the lobby of the hospital, totally disoriented, bloody, in a hospital gown, and he's like this, and he starts walking outside, and my mom's like, she's like, hold your dad for a minute. And she ran after him, and she's like, are you okay? You look like you're lost. And he's like, I don't know where I am. And my sweet mom was like, I'm going to help you find your way back to your room. And I was just thinking what it means to be a person who, literally, even in the moment that she's holding her own husband who's not well, she's got her eyes up all the time. And you know who I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you, the people who do that. You're literally always looking like, are you okay? Are you all right? And
I'm married to one of these people.
I know you are. You might be one of these people too, Barry, I dare say. And then inevitably, invariably, we also at some point turn to the left. And it's very hard to reorient and to be held when we're used to holding. And we have all these people in our community who literally, they go through crises, and we call them, they're the people who organize the meal trains for everyone else. And we call them, and we're like, you're having surgery on Wednesday. We want to organize a meal train. They're like, no, I got it. I don't need anything. And we're like, no, this is what community does. We feed each other after surgery. That's what it means to have a community. And so it's very hard to switch perspectives like that. And I struggled with it. And, I'll say two things. It's a very personal question. So I'm going to give you two very personal answers. One is, at my father's funeral, he died end of August, just before Rosh Hashanah. And at his funeral, most of the ceremony, I don't really remember, honestly. I don't remember who was there. I don't remember what I said. But we went out to the burial, and it was 103 degrees out in Simi Valley. And I have people place earth on the coffins with our own hands instead of using the shovels. It's totally okay, halachically, according to Jewish law, to use a shovel, but I feel like it's more powerful and resonant to bury someone with your own hands. And so the immediate family went up. My mom placed the earth, and then we each did. And then usually the immediate family will move back into a little tent that's 20 feet back, but where there's some shade. And my mom just did not want to they've been married for so many years, and they were a couple where they never went away without the other spouse. They did everything together. And so she just did not want to be away from his graveside, and even 20 feet. And so we ran and got her a chair, and she just sat down right at the edge of the grave. And then we just all sat down right beside her, the whole family, and the grandkids, the kids, and we just started singing. We were singing. Now I remember we were singing. Do you know El Nora Alila from Ne'ilah? El Nora Alila. It's so beautiful. And we were just weeping and singing. And I've never seen anything like this, all of us just sitting together. And then I looked up, and I saw the whole community was there placing earth on his coffin with their hands. And it was hundreds of people. And I just, it totally took my breath away. There were staff members who worked at IKAR who I haven't seen in 7 years, who just showed up, and all these people who schlepped and drove. And then Melissa had this idea, Melissa Balban, my CEO, who's here somewhere in this room, who's an angel from God, who had this idea that my dad's like great love in life, aside from my mom, was ice cream. And so she's like, what if we have ice cream at the funeral? And so basically, like, someone went out and bought 300 ice cream bars, and as people were, after they left the burial site, like, someone was handing out ice cream to everyone for them to eat in the car on the way home. Like, people just showed up, and it mattered. And I hear I had written this book, closed the manuscript, and like, I'm saying you have to keep coming from the right and hold people with love when they come from the left. And then all these people just showed up because they, like, the Torah was in them already. And that was so powerful for me. And I'll just share one last thing, which is then we went into Shiva, and immediately I'm like, okay, I'm switching back to coming from the right now. And I'm like getting people chairs and feeding them. And I'm like, how was your mom's surgery? And how's your foot? And being a rabbi. And again, Melissa and my husband David were like, no, you are being a bad rabbi. You need to sit down and be a mourner and show people what it means to let other people take care of you, because you're coming from the left now. And it took me like 3 or 4 nights to do it. And finally, by the end of Shiva, and I think this is why, thank God, Shiva's 7 nights so we can like retrain ourselves. But I just sat down and people came over and asked me, like, tell me about your dad. And I just wept and like told stories about my father. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to walk to the left and be held by people who came from the right. And I wrote the book as someone who really, thank God, for most of my life, I had experienced loss, but not of an immediate family member. I was never, a mourner is if it's a spouse, a child, or a parent, or a sibling. And only the immediate family members are you technically a mourner. So it was really my first time being a mourner technically. And so it's been really powerful.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
You know I could talk about that for hours, but
I know. Well, thank you.
We don't have hours, Barry, do we?
No, we don't, sadly.
No.
Well, thank you for indulging that personal, piece of the puzzle. And I never had the honor of meeting your father, but I'm a firm believer that apples don't fall far from trees. So knowing you, as I have had the honor to do, I know him to be an amazing human being. So, can you talk for a little bit about, just pulling out a little bit, and you touch on it in the book in a couple of different places, but you and Melissa and your team, you've built something very special in Los Angeles. And for those that haven't physically been to IKAR, you should go. And for those that can't go, you should go onto YouTube and watch or Facebook and participate in Friday night Kabbalat Shabbat or Saturday morning services, or it's just a remarkable place, both being there and from a distance. But you kind of changed a bit of a paradigm in a world where people are lamenting the decline of synagogues, etc., the decline of affiliation, so to speak, and you and there are others have kind of totally turned that on its head. Can you just talk a little bit about IKAR and a little bit about how you see kind of general, there's this kind of like people say religion is declining, but spirituality is growing. And so, this kind of like, how do you see communal prayer evolving from what you've learned from the work that you guys have been doing over the last number of years?
Yeah, sure. We started IKAR in the spring of 2004. And part of the impetus for the community was that there was this massive discontinuity crisis that everyone in the established Jewish world was talking about. And I met all these young, smart, creative, interesting people. I was in my late 20s, and who were Jewish, but were not connected to Jewish institutional life. And I just started asking people, like, what do you care about? What do you want? What do you yearn for in your life? And what I found was that people really want community. They want ritual. They want to feel connected to something that's bigger than this moment. They want moral clarity. They even might want a relationship with God, some of them, some not. But I realized all the things that people, like, that are ostensibly supposed to get in religious institutional spaces, the young people are still hungry for, but just don't believe that they're going to find in these institutional environments. And so maybe the problem is not the generation. And maybe the problem's not that we're not giving away enough free pizza. The problem is that we're not creating the kind of environments that really feel challenging, stimulating, that they're going to bring people into the kind of community that they yearn for, the kind of ritual experiences that they want. And I think in an attempt to address the discontinuity crisis, a lot of Jewish leaders made a decision that we would sort of make things easier for people. Like, we'll lower the bar for entry so that people can come in more easily. But that whole generation did not want things that were easy. And, I remember I had one really dear friend who would drive to Burbank because it was the best yoga instructor in the city. And if you know anything about LA, you don't drive to Burbank for anything. And, here she would drive like an hour out of her way because she wanted the most challenging instructor, because she felt the best after that workout. And I'm like, why are we making things easier for a generation that actually wants things to be more challenging and more exciting and so more rigorous? And I felt like we sort of got it wrong. The community got it wrong. So I was a brand new rabbi, and and essentially the night that I met Melissa and her husband, who became the founders of IKAR, we were introduced, by the way, by one Daniel Sokach, friend of many people in this room, I'm sure, the head of the New Israel Fund. And Melissa and Adam asked me to actually write down my vision of what's possible in the Jewish world. And I was, fresh out of seminary, new to Los Angeles. And I essentially went home that night and wrote, religion in the public square right now is increasingly defined by religious extremism that is often insular, it is violent, and it is increasingly regressive. And at exactly the same moment, when the religious institutions should provide a counter-testimony to that kind of regressive religious extremism, they are becoming more muted, more afraid, less creative, less interesting. And there's a whole generation of people who are sort of voting with their feet and saying, we reject a religion that is deadly, and we reject a religion that's already dead. And so, what about it going back to, as David Steindl-Rast, the great Benedictine monk David Steindl-Rast says, every single religious practitioner today needs to do the work of sacred excavation. We have these amazing traditions that have lasted for thousands of years. What are they ultimately about? They're not about violence and cruelty and regressive politics, and they're not about institutional preservation. They're actually, our Jewish tradition actually has a prophetic voice that calls us into moral clarity in difficult moments, that teaches us how to love each other, how to incline toward each other when we want to retreat. So what if we re-engage the tradition and then translate it into a language that people in our time could really resonate to? And somehow just talking about that while, creating a davening environment, a prayer environment with really good music and with great scotch and with really good coffee on Saturday mornings.
Now you know why I'm there.
There's right. There, something about that clicked, and the community was born. I would say the first several years, the average age was 27, which was kind of the holy grail demographic in the Jewish world. And we weren't giving stuff away for free, and we weren't doing anything super dramatic and different, hula dancing on the, we were on the beach with fireworks. We were just doing Judaism in a way that felt honest and felt exciting and joyous, and also creating a space where people could dance together and also weep together. And where there was a broader mission that was about trying to build a more just and loving society. And somehow the combination of all those things, I think, kind of clicked. And now it's 20 years. For the Jewish nerds in the room like me, Parshat Tazria Mitzorah is our birth parsha, and so that's really a mark of, I think, that's our greatest success, is that we launched on the hardest parsha of the year, and we somehow made it. It wasn't like Bereshit or, Shemot. And so anyway, so we're coming to our anniversary now, and it's been an incredible journey, and the most interesting people find their way to IKAR, and I love the community with all my heart. It's both a love letter. It's a love story between this Mishnah and me, and a love letter to my community in many ways.
Well, having been a couple of times, and what you said something about the translation. I think the secret sauce, and here I am on stage with one of the great rabbis of our time, so I'm going to probably get this wrong, but I think I remember hearing a Mishnah about the first time that the Torah was ever read. And of course, it was read in a language that the people in the market didn't understand. And so out in the marketplace, they had translators around who were translating this great wisdom, out to people. And I think what the secret sauce of IKAR is, and it's, you and your team, you're able to somehow translate. I often say that the Torah is like the greatest piece of software that was ever written, right? There are no updates. And yes, sure, we'd all take out our Sharpies, and we would, get rid of, the misogyny or the things that we don't think make any sense anymore. But by and large, it's just a brilliant piece of software, and therefore, it requires. I don't know how to write software. I need experts to help me decode it to understand it, and you and your team are just amazing at doing that. We'll open up for questions from the audience in a few minutes. I wanted to ask you, in this particular time, and with the events of the last 6 months, and I always find my saying that the word events doesn't really kind of capture the gravity. How do you hold the kind of the universalism of and the grand vision that is IKAR and the Jewish people, I will say, and also this notion of pain and hurt and therefore this kind of pulling back into some level of tribalism and particularism that I think a lot of us feel. How do you navigate that in this moment?
So it's such a painful time. I mean, catastrophic on so many levels. And the first thing I'll say is we are, by nature, relational beings. We need each other in order to survive. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, that is true. And we are also tribal beings, that we need our tribes in order to really thrive. And we know that, a sense of belonging, a sense of connection and community is really essential to human thriving. And tribes aren't bad things, that we often we put ourselves into tribal relationships with people who either look like us or pray like us or vote like us or live near us or send their kids to the same preschool that we do. Like, we build tribes, and it's actually really helpful to build a tribe. Some might say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it's true. We actually need each other to support and to support one another and to grow. But there's a downside to tribes, which is we now know that, and there's some incredible research in this space, that the deeper our affinity to our tribe and our sense of connection to our tribe, the more indifference or even hostility we feel toward people who are outside our tribe. We know this, but the fact that the data bears that out is really incredible to me. The deeper our connection to our tribe, however we define our tribe, the more indifferent or even hostile we feel toward people outside our tribe. So that's something that we have to be aware of and that we have to actively work to counter, because what's happening right now is sort of the tribalization of our society, of our American society, of our Jewish community, right? It's not just that the Jews are one tribe and outside the Jews, it's like, what kind of Jew are you? And what kind of progressive Jew are you, right? And so we are, and then the more we identify with that particular brand of progressive San Francisco Jew, the more hostility we feel to everyone who's not in that quarter. Okay, so what do we do about that? So I've been thinking a lot about morning rituals because they're brilliant, as we have discussed, because I'm living them right now. I'm still in my year as an Avela, as a mourner. And because they're really at the heart of the work of a pulpit rabbi, and also they're at the heart of the book in many ways, which is also a book about joy, which we're also going to talk about after this. So
Yes.
Don't think it's all about grief. But I do want to say something that I found really to be a really stunning truth in the course of the last 5 months when we've been so upside down, that when one is in Shiva, we are surrounded by love. The only people who come to your Shiva home are people who have only love toward you. If you have enmity toward a person, you do not go to their home. It's not right. The rabbis say it's actually cruel to go to the home of somebody who you've had a conflict with, because then already on top of their grief, they now have to deal with the fact that their enemy entered the room. And by the way, I remember one Shiva home in particular where there was a child who died, and a bunch of kids from that child's 8th grade class showed up, and these kids had bullied her mercilessly. And the parents who were dealing with the death of their child could no longer focus on the grief because they had to deal with their complicated feelings toward these children who came in because they thought it was the right thing to do, because their parents were like, you got to show up and it's like, wait until after the Shiva and then make amends. Okay, so we're only surrounded by love during Shiva. Strangers can come, but only strangers who can come with love. You are fed, you are cared for, people are there to listen with you, to cry with you, to laugh with you, to look at pictures. We're there to keep each other alive during Shiva, because during Shiva you might want to die, because your loved one is in the ground and you might want to be there with them. And so the job of the community is just to give you love and support, but you can't stay in Shiva forever. And there is a moment where after the requisite time, which in our case, as Jews, is 7 days, you get up from the house of mourning and you walk around the block. A circle, by the way. Think about this, a circle. And you walk around the block. And when you do, what do you notice? That, oh, look, there's this guy who lives across the street whose mother's in the hospital. I wonder how she's doing. And, oh, this one also lost his father a year ago. We should talk. Maybe we can, share stories. Oh, look, the sweet couple from Shul just bought a house 2 doors down. I have to remember to bake them a pie, Like, oh my gosh, here are a bunch of kids getting high before going to school, like all the kids on my street do before going to school. It's like they open the door and this waft of smoke comes out and we're like, okay.
So you're back out in the world.
Exactly. You're back out in the world. And suddenly you expand the scope of moral concern from your own broken heart and your own loved one to think about how the world is bigger. There's traffic, there's loss, there's love, there's marriage, there's divorce, there's all this stuff of life. And when you do that, you're not abandoning your family. I'm still thinking about my father every single day, but I recognize that my loss is not the only loss in the world. We all do this at some point. And what I've realized over the course of the last few months, traveling around and talking about the book and just being a rabbi after October 7th and witnessing how this terrible war has unfolded and how much anguish there is and just human suffering there is in the world, I've realized that we're all at different stages of grieving. Some in our Jewish community are still deep in Shiva, right? There's still 134 hostages who are in Gaza, and we don't know if they're alive or dead, and we don't know if they're coming home. And so, we can't finish our grief and get up and walk around the block. We're suspended in the air right now. And then there are others who feel like I grieved, I wept, I've been through my anguish. I am ready to expand the scope of my moral concern beyond my most immediate pain. And I can see things now that I really couldn't see when I was completely upside down, in the earliest days after the atrocities of October 7th. And they're engaged in a different kind of conversation. And I think part of what's happening in our Jewish community right now is not just a generational split, as Ezra Klein so brilliantly described. There's the generation of my parents for whom Israel was the David in the sea of the Arab world, the Goliath, And then there's my generation, like my coming of age, you know, in Israel in the 90s, it was like the Oslo years, and Israel was powerful but striving for peace. And then there's the next generation, really my kids' generation, where Israel was powerful and not striving for peace. And so he describes that that's part of it, the heart of what's going on in our families, what we're all going to be experiencing at our Seder tables in a couple weeks. And good luck to you. Good luck to all of us. It's going to be interesting. But that's not the only thing.
That's the joy part, right?
Right.
That's,
That's why we drink a lot of wine at Seder. Right? Like, but it's not actually just a generational divide. It's also that we're all experiencing different stages of grief, I think.
That's a great way to see it.
And so I feel like some of us are just not able to see beyond our own broken hearts right now. And I get it.
Yeah.
And some of us like very quickly move to, oh my God, the Jews aren't the only ones in pain here. Can anyone else see what I see? And so I feel like part of what we can do to bridge the conversation between these is not convince each other, you're more right than I am, or I'm more right than you are, but just see the brokenness at the heart of all of our experiences right now, and take the basic Torah of this like brilliant ritual at the temple, which is what would happen if we actually look at each other and see, you know, not just someone coming toward me or someone coming at me from the other direction, not just an opponent who sees the world differently than me now, and I need to show them that, like, your grandparents are turning over in their grave, or I need to show them, like, I took your Jewish values, and that's why I'm showing up at the protest on, you know, on whatever night. But instead, like, I see that your heart's broken. Can you tell me about your broken heart? And I see that your heart's broken too. Can you tell me about your broken heart? What if we, like, the very essence, Melissa and I were discussing this before, like, the very essence of the Seder is asking questions. And what if we actually ask, like, go to a deep place of curiosity about one another and say, like, tell me, what do you see? Because I don't see the world the way you do right now. You're coming this way, I'm coming this way. Like, we're in fight or flight mode right now. Either, like, I hear people who say, I literally haven't talked to my mother in 5 months. And I hear people who say, I literally haven't talked to my kids in 5 months. And like, so either we're fleeing, or every time we talk, we're going for the knockout punch. And what if instead we looked in each other's eyes and said, what do you see from your vantage point? I can see that your heart is broken. What would we find? And in fact, I think of the world in like the Venn diagram, you know, sort of overlapping circles. And I think we're often screaming at each other from the margins where we really don't see the world the same way, but we do have a lot in common. And a lot of what we have in common is our pain right now and our brokenheartedness. And so what if we start there? Could that be the beginning of a reconnection, reconnecting to one another, rededicating ourselves to the relationship and to the process of healing as we navigate this incredibly difficult time?
I think it's beautiful. Thank you. We're going to get to the joy before we're done, but I know we've got some time here, and I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie to coordinate with some questions that people have for Rabbi Brous. So there you are. Anybody? Just raise your hand, and Stephanie will come find you. And if you could keep the question, you know, a question has a question mark at the end of it. Just the polite. You can't see anything impolite with a Scottish accent. So, you know, just keep it short and sweet, and we'll try and get through as many of them as we can.
I got the rules. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. What you're saying is amazing. It's really interesting to hear a lot of like philosophical ideas where I'm nodding my head. I'm like, oh, yes, 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 yes. But it's really hard to put those into action, especially when like Jewish culture, like we have these events, we have these holidays, we have these milestones. And so we can take action at a milestone, but a milestone doesn't always come around. So like, how do you put some of these philosophies and ideas into action in everyday life? Because that's where we're doing the stuff. And I will say one thing, like at my kids' school, they have a bench. They have this yellow bench. And so if you want someone to talk to you, if you're feeling lonely, then you can sit on the bench. Because, you know, you can sit on other benches. But like that idea is so that people come to you. I don't know, I have to check in and see if they're actually using it, but it's one of those like small ways that you can take this into like everyday action and not wait to go to the Temple Mount for like a massive ritual.
I love this question. Thank you so much. First of all, the tradition of the bench comes from Zimbabwe. It's called the Friendship Bench, and it was created because they have a crisis. They don't have enough mental health workers in the country, and they're in a mental health crisis moment like we are. And what they realized is that grandmas are very, very good at listening to people and giving love. And so they set up a bench outside of the health clinics that they have, and they have grandmas, saftas, who are sitting there who are just trained to listen, and people come and talk to a safta. And it's an amazing idea, and in my dream for IKAR, like we're building a building in LA, God willing, in the days ahead, and my dream is to have friendship benches like your kids' school, because it's such a beautiful idea. Like, I am here to hear you. And so how can we manifest these ideas in our lives outside of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem? So I, at the end of the book, have 8 practices that are designed to answer exactly that question, one for each chapter of the book. Very practical things that we can do every single day. I call them spiritual practices because for me, they are spiritual practices. But super simple things, and I'm going to give you 2 examples. One, I told you earlier that 1 out of 3 Americans don't know the names of their next door neighbors. So take a slow walk around your block once a week and say hello to every person you meet. And I started to do this during COVID, and it has changed my whole relationship with my neighborhood. It started because I work all the time, and so I have crazy work hours, and I don't know a lot of my own neighbors, or didn't know. And one day, the morning after Yom Kippur, I slept in, and so I went out a little bit later than usual, and I happened to meet my neighbor across the street, and his name's David, and we started chatting, and I told him I was a rabbi. He had no idea. And then he asked me, like something about Yom Kippur, and I told him I just preached this sermon about this incredible study that happened in a neuropsych lab that I was so moved by, and he said, that was my team. We enacted that study that you spoke about on Yom Kippur because you were so moved by it. So I'm like, how did I not know my neighbor? And I had lived there for 10 years. I never met the guy before. So during COVID, I started to go for a run in my neighborhood with my husband every morning. And it's like we call it a Brous Light half marathon because it's 1.3 miles instead of 13 miles. It's like my version of a half marathon. So I do 1.3 miles every day, and I say hello to absolutely every single person. And and I know my neighbors now. So that's one thing. I'm going to give you another example. And here I invoke the name of my beloved friend Shifra Bronsnick in New York City, who's a beautiful mentor who has become a very dear friend, who I imagine is a friend to some in this room as well. Shifra met the most wonderful man in the world, named Michael. They were actually introduced by Vivian Silver, who was killed on October 7th. Who built Women Wage Peace, and an incredible hero and a great inspiration to so many of us. But Vivian introduced Shifra to Michael. They fell in love, and it was like a later in life love in which they were supposed to spend the rest of their lives together and really get old together. But after just a few years, Michael was diagnosed with lung cancer. He died within a year. And Shifra was kind of thrust into deep grief. And she called me a couple of weeks. You'll see Shifra a few times in the book. And she called me a couple weeks into the grief, and she said, the whole like widow in sackcloth and ashes thing isn't working for me. She said, because I fell in love with Michael because he was full of joy. And he literally was like, he was the life of the party. He was always surrounded by friends. He would laugh. He had the best laugh. And she said, it doesn't feel right for me to be like sitting at home crying all the time. I want to honor him with joy. And so she set her clock for 18 minutes and just forced herself to do something that would give her joy for 18 minutes. And then she did it the next day and the next day and the next day. And we call it 18 minutes of joy. And she grieved through joy. She experienced joy as an act of love for her beloved. And I decided that I was going to take on her 18 minutes of joy in solidarity. And so, like, eat the chocolate cake. And, like, really dance in your apartment, like, blasting the music when no one else is home. And I did it with her for the year, and I still do it. I still, like, force myself to have these moments of joy, because the world can be a very dark and painful place, and I'm grieving too, and we're all grieving. And, like, what if we allow ourselves to just have this experience of joy? And so the practice of 18 minutes of joy is something that I say, like, joy is not a luxury item. Joy is a spiritual necessity. We need joy in order to survive. Our bodies need it, and our spirits need it. And so what if we actually allow ourselves to have that? And there are a number of other practices there that are designed to be like things that we can take on in our lives in a very practical way. I'm going to say actually one more, even though I said two, because you mentioned earlier, like, walking around this city with so many unhoused people, and it like creates a spiritual crisis. I mean, either you become psychically numb and shut it off and, like, try not to see, or you know which streets to avoid, or you become callous, and or you just break because there's too much. And there was this incredible woman in our community named Hannah, and she one day LA is a lot like San Francisco in this sense. I mean, we have, I think it's like 76,000 people sleeping on the street. It's horrific. And one day Hannah was walking her dog in the park, and she saw a young man sleeping on a bench, and she started talking to him, and she asked him if she could take him out for breakfast. And they sat together and talked, and then Hannah said, "You have to stay with me in my home until you can, like, get back on your feet." And she had this guy sleep in her spare bedroom in her house, and we were terrified. I mean, all of her friends were like, "Are you out of your mind? Like, this guy, I mean, we don't trust this guy, and, what if he harms you, and what if he steals, and what if he..." And she just fed him every day, 3 meals a day, and she took care of him, and she asked him questions, and she engaged him. And he actually, like, it helped him heal. And he is totally back on his feet and living this, like, very beautiful life. He found love. He has a career. He's like, it's an incredible story. And I am almost reluctant to tell the story because most of us are not Hannah. And Hannah died, by the way, a couple of years ago of cancer, and he spoke, after her death, and he said, "This woman saved my life with love." And so, but I was telling the story to someone as I was writing the book, and she's like, "Don't put that story in the book, because it's going to make people think if I can't be Hannah, then I can't do anything." But then she emailed me the next day, and she said that she was walking out of Zabar's on the Upper West Side, and she had bags of groceries in both hands. And as she was walking out, there was an unhoused person who had a giant shopping cart full of, like, trash bags with stuff. And that shopping cart tipped over right in front of her, right when she was walking out of Zabar's. And she said, "What would Hannah do?" And she realized Hannah would invite that homeless person into her house, and she was not going to do that. But what could she do? She put her bags down on a New York City street, okay? Put her bags down, and went over and said, "Can I help you with your stuff?" And the person said yes, and she helped lift the things back into the cart, and then wrote me the email saying, "Thank you for telling the Hannah story after all, because I can't be Hannah, but I can be me, and I can do a little bit." And so, like, this is exactly to your point that we can't do everything, but we can do something, so do something.
Do something, no doubt.
Hello. Over. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Do you mind if I hold this? Basically, I had to give a speech to my Catholic school about what it meant to be Jewish to me, and I was like, "I got this." And then I was like, "I do not got this. I have no idea what it means." And I was just wondering if you have an answer.
What?
It's a small question.
More specifically, I think in this context of all of these things that Judaism calls us to do and teaches us to do, that I think I resonate with and you resonate with, and a lot of people here do. Like, we got that part. We kind of have what we need to do, but for me, I kind of have to backstep a little bit and be like, why is this what calls me, and, like, what makes me part of this tradition? Since there's a lot of things in it that, like, I don't keep kosher, so that's not what makes me Jewish. I was just wondering what does. Okay,
that is such a great question. Thank you for that. I will say that one of the things that is most powerful about our Jewish tradition to me is the fact that we have a meta-narrative that guides everything that we do as Jews. We have a core story, a foundational story, and that story is the story of the Exodus from Egypt. It's the story that takes 4 of the 5 books of the Torah, and in fact, you could argue that Genesis is just kind of a preamble to Exodus. And it's a story that we will soon turn our kitchens and our world upside down in order to tell and retell during Passover. It's a story that we hearken back to at every Friday night when Shabbat is coming in, and we say, Zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim. We remember the Exodus from Egypt, and we actually say it 3 times a day in traditional liturgy. It's a story that we're obsessed with. And that story is a story that our people were oppressed and degraded and humiliated and enslaved for hundreds of years, and then in partnership with God, we're able to walk toward redemption. And we learn from that the world moves on a trajectory from enslavement to freedom, from darkness to light, from narrowness. Mitzrayim is the constricted place, to expansiveness, to the place of great promise. And that work is never done, because at the end of the Torah, we haven't reached the promised land yet. And so what that says to us is that really the central premise of Jewish life is that anything is possible. That even from the depths of our degradation and cruelty and hopelessness and despair, we can move towards something better, and that just world, that better world, that more loving world has not yet been achieved. And our work as Jews for the rest of human history is to try to take us one step closer to that promised land. And I think that is the way that I wake up in the morning. That's the way I read the paper every day. That's the way that I try to guide, my steps, like the choices that I make throughout the world. Is this a decision? Is this a hire? Is this a budgeting choice? Is this a book that will help make the world a little bit closer to that just and loving reality that our ancestors started marching toward so many thousands of years ago, and we haven't yet arrived at?
Beautiful. Oh.
One more question. Just want to remind everybody that Rabbi Brous is going to be out in the atrium afterwards, and we've got cookies, so stick around for that.
Rabbi Brous, I love your book so much. I read it out loud to my husband. At first he's annoyed, and then he hears what you say. And he loves it too. I think one of the passages you spoke about before that moved us so much was you talked about this art that was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and yet we see people on the street and we can't value them in the same way. And one of the things I appreciate so much about your work is thinking about both the individual and the collective, and how can we sort of use our individual power, but also to influence the collective, to have those breakthrough kinds of ideas that lead to action. I think that's part of what you do, and I wanted to ask you about that.
First of all, thank you for lifting up that piece of the text. And here I cite Rabbi Yitz Greenberg in the book, who's just a great theologian, like truly one of the greats, whose teaching on a Mishnah from Sanhedrin changed my rabbinate and the trajectory of my life, I am sure. And I think many rabbis and many Jewish professionals and many Jewish Jews can say that. But I mean, what he has been speaking about relentlessly over the course of many decades now is that every human being created in God's own image has 3 innate dignities: infinite worth. We have no idea how much a person's life is worth. I speak about this in chapter 3. Equality, that religion and racism are fundamentally incompatible, Because if you believe that we all come from Adam Harishon, that first person, we're all descendants from the same first person, how can you say that some people are just fundamentally better than other people? It just doesn't work. And uniqueness, that every single person has something to contribute in this world, and that the world is bereft without us actually being ourselves. That when we try to be someone else, we're failing on every level because we can't be someone else, but also because we need to be us, because the world needs us to be us. Okay, so that's Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, and he has a new book coming out shortly, and so you should keep eyes out for it. I think it's 900 pages. His book could eat my book for breakfast and still be hungry for more. So, and so the individual and the collective. I mean, I'll just say very briefly that I'm bringing us back to the beloved community comment. Like, we can't actually change people out there in the abstract without changing ourselves, right? We just, it's not possible. And so, I often feel, and people say like, well, what if I am, trying to hold curiosity toward others, but they don't hold that curiosity toward me? And by the way, I heard this from a lot of Jews after October 7th. Mm-hmm. Like, what if I'm now turning to the left and all the people that I tried to hold from the right for so many, years are just abandoning me? They've just ghosted me, and nobody's holding me. And so why should I stay invested? And why should I continue to show up for the battles that, for other people when they don't show up for me? And the only thing that we can control in this world is ourselves. Like, do you want to be a person who is guided by curiosity and compassion and tenderness and love and hope? Do you want to be a person who believes the world can be better or not? And you give up on the world because I can't change the collective. The only way to change the collective is to be the best versions of ourselves, and then hope that there's a reverberative effect from our love and from our joy and from our tenderness and our compassion. And yeah, we're going to get hurt. Okay, like my grandfather. Can I just say a word about Pa Sam for a minute? My grandpa, he tipped in obscenely. I mean. He was my grandfather was famous for not converting money to other currencies when he would travel, and then just tipping in dollars. So he would take a taxi in Israel, and it would be 20 shekels, and he'd just give them $20. And he's like, keep the change, and we're like, Pa Sam, that is obscene. That's the equivalent of $4 or $5. He's like, you know what? He needs the money more than I do. And I thought, we used to think, but you're getting taken advantage of. And he's like, no, I just I feel like I can, so I want to. And, and I think now that he's gone, and I think about what his legacy was, he gave people who needed more than he did what he had. And I just I love that about him. And so I feel yeah, you could get taken advantage of because you're still going to show up for the people who didn't show up for you. Yeah, because I want to live in a world where people are compassionate toward each other, and where people are care about building a just society, even if I feel betrayed and hurt and anguished, by the fact that you weren't there for me. I'm still going to show up for you because that's the right thing to do. And the Jewish people aren't called to build a more just world so that other people will show up for us when we're the ones getting hit. We're called to build a more just world because we came out of Mitzrayim, we came out of Egypt, and and we saw what it's like when people are degraded and demeaned and humiliated and enslaved. And we were told, you build a world that's a counter-testimony to that kind of cruelty by bringing more love and more justice into the world. We do that regardless of how people respond to us, because that's who we are in the world. That's who we're called to be. So the way to change the collective is to change ourselves. That's all we got.
So... I'm going to close with a few quick words, and then I'm going to pass it back to Sharon for just a quick little closing that we've discussed. First of all, I want to thank everybody at the JCC, and you alluded it to earlier. You people you're just working so hard. You've always worked so hard, and everybody in the Jewish community is working hard. And then October 7th happened, and your jobs got 1,000,000 times harder, and you work 1,000,000 times harder, and we appreciate it. So thank you. And I just want to tell a very quick story about the ripple effects of this incredible individual who's sitting to my left, and how, how we're able to just make a change and a difference in people's lives, and how she inspires so many people to do that. And last night she inspired me. I was at another event, just a small event, where Rabbi Brous was speaking, and she took us through the circling and the amen effect, and to the right and to the left, and talking about mourning and trouble. And a woman in the room who I did not know, just kind of stood up and quietly walked out, and I glanced over and saw that she was crying. So I'm like, okay, well, I just got my marching orders from my rabbi. I should go, and so I just went, and I just said, hey, how are you? And she told me that this was the 4th anniversary of the passing of her sister, and it just brought up a whole bunch of emotion. And we had a nice little exchange, no more than 30 seconds. And then she, composed herself and came back in to listen to the rest of it. I didn't know this woman. She didn't know me. Today, she sent me an email. She must have reached out to the person who hosted, gotten my email, and basically said that, basically just thanked me for taking the time. And the point behind all of that is that, the notion of giving and receiving is, sometimes you need to receive more, and sometimes you need to give more, and sometimes we'll be circling to the right, and sometimes we'll be circling to the left. You are a treat. You are brilliant. And at the risk of embarrassing, there's a lot of geschrei goes on in the Jewish world about how to make Jewish life better. And I'm a firm believer that I actually have the answer, which is cloning. Is the answer. Because, not to get too rabbinic, but if there were 100 more Rabbi Sharon Brouses in the world, the rest would be commentary. Thank you. And with that, I'll pass it to you.
So I started this book tour just a couple months after my dad died, and I'm saying Kaddish every day, and it's not easy when you're like going from city to city, and you sort of get in at exactly the wrong time for the minyan. And so I just started to invite people at the end of each talk, whether it was a Jewish crowd or not a Jewish crowd, if there were any other mourners in the room. And I have to say, I've never been in a room so far where I'm the only mourner. And so I just want to ask tonight, if you are grieving the death of a loved one, or if you're marking a yard site, the anniversary of a death, if you would be brave enough to rise and just stand right now in this room with me. And I'm going to just invite folks to turn and look around at who's standing. And there's this saying that, like, be kind, for you have no idea what kind of storm is raging beneath the surface for another person. We don't know who's brokenhearted next to us. And so I'm gonna say Mourner's Kaddish. I'll invite you to join with me if you're comfortable, and if you're standing, and then if you're seated, if you'll just say Amen. It would be such an honor for those of us who are brokenhearted to just hear you say, as much as your grief might scare me or unnerve me or make me feel vulnerable to loss myself, I'm not running away from you. I'm going to incline toward you. And I'm going to do it again and again and again and again. The text says, Amen, 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 amen. 5 amens we say in the Mourner's Kaddish, and it's just kind of reminding us, building the spiritual muscle memory for what it means to actually show up for each other with love. So I'll say the words, and feel free to join me if you know them. Yitkadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'yalmad divrach irutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon u'v'yamechon u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael b'agalat u'v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam omei omaya. Yitzbarach v'yishtabach v'yitzpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechemata Da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
I want to ask of us to please not let anybody who's standing now walk out of the room tonight without at least somebody asking, who are you grieving? Do you want to share something about your loved one? And to the beautiful question that you asked earlier about how we can enact this outside of the Temple Mount, this is how, by paying attention to each other in this very beautiful way. And I bless you all that in your moments of sadness and in your moments of joy, that you are held tenderly and with love. And let us say,
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.